Welcome. Thank you very much for joining. Thanks, Rob. Haven't seen you in a while. Thanks, Shapur. Good that you got away from your networking hellhole. So yeah, brilliant, cool. Right, as we've wasted a lot of time already, let's just try and jump straight into it. So I'm going to assume that most of you know who I am. For those of you that don't, I'm Matt. I'm a Microsoft certified expert with about 15 years now of experience in the field with plenty of war wounds. And I'm here to try and show you how, or investigate how we could maybe use ChatGPT as our consultant when deploying Microsoft 365. So the way that I'm going to try and approach this is as if I was a person that didn't fully really understand Microsoft 365, and it's something that I was new to doing. And rather than asking sort of intelligent questions, I'm going to deliberately try and ask sort of what I'd call semi-intelligent questions, i.e., not from a position of knowledge. So doing this, we are using ChatGPT 4. That is the paid for version of ChatGPT. I'm assuming that everyone here has at least heard of ChatGPT, if not has used it a little bit themselves, maybe. GPT-4 is a little bit slower than 3.5, but it gives much better, more creative responses. It also is their subscribed for version and costs about $20 a month. One of the things that I thought I'd be able to do and couldn't do is actually utilize the video and picture inputs of GPT-4. But unfortunately, that is something you can only do when you're using the development API. And you'll see when we get down through some of my prompts that I actually tried to point it out to URL and then didn't go so well. Anyway, let's get straight into it. So I will just share my screen. Let's make sure we get the right one. Okay, cool. So let's have a little look at the first prompt that I gave ChatGPT. I want you to act as my consultant. I have a business and we need a new productivity platform. We have chosen Microsoft 365 and we now need to set it up from scratch. Microsoft 365 must ensure that our users can be productive with their daily tasks, such as email, instant messaging, and external collaborations with other businesses. However, it must also be secure and our data needs to be protected on the platform. We must not be susceptible to being hacked. How can we set up a new Microsoft 365 tenant to meet our needs? So what I've done here is I've tried to think like more of a business person or maybe someone from the C-suite, for example, trying to maybe investigate how they can get an M365 tenant set up. I haven't actually given them a number of users or a size or tier of business yet, but in my mind, I'm thinking that the most applicable kind of number would be about maybe 50 users or so. That's 50, 100 users. That's kind of the size of organization that I'm looking at. Maybe someone that's got a sysadmin that's not done Microsoft 365 before. Maybe they're migrating over from Google, something like that. So if we have a look at GPT's response, it gives us a fairly coherent and decent set of steps. It says sign up for M365, set up your domain, create user accounts and assign licenses, configure email, set up teams, implement security and data protection, configure external collaboration, training, which is a really, really important part, is ensure that your employees can actually use it, review and update settings, and monitor and maintain. Now, this is actually a pretty good response. If it's very high level, but it's pretty good. However, I do have a pretty big bugbear with it, sort of right off the bat, and that's where it says create user accounts and assign licenses after setting up the domain. If we think about the original prompt that we gave ChatGPT, one of the most important things that I specifically said was we must not be susceptible to being hacked. Now, if I was a consultant sat in a room with a customer, I'd be thinking, okay, they've called that out, they've said this, and it's clearly something that's important to them. So I really need to take that into account and ensure that it's something that's at the forefront of my mind with anything that I'm suggesting or coming up with. So I think the fact that ChatGPT hasn't necessarily put things in the order that I would necessarily do it, despite me calling it out quite explicitly, is a pretty big deal. I would have said that the next thing after you set up your domain and sign up for M365 would be to put all of the necessary policies and security settings in place, at least like not just to rely on the tenant built defaults, because there are tenant built defaults, but I don't know. I would have thought that maybe perhaps there could be a better response there. So if we carry on scrolling down, I kind of let it off the hook there for a minute, and then said, "So which business plan do I need?" Now, I didn't actually ask a particularly good question here. Um, I gave it very little context. I gave it very little information, and I kind of wanted to sort of see what happened next. And I was talking about licensing. And fortunately, ChatGPT picked straight up on that and said, M365 offers several business plans, each for different organization sizes, need, and budget. So um, it reminds us again that its knowledge cutoff was in September 2021. And this is a little bit of a handy reminder, because a few times now I've used ChatGPT to maybe look at PowerShell scripts and whatnot, and the commandlets have changed or things are slightly different since September 21, because we're a year and a half on. So just something to bear in mind. So it's given the business license types that we've got and that might be applicable for us. If I had a customer that came to me with the requirements outlined in the first prompt, external collaboration, instant messaging, email, and that we were looking for a productivity platform, I would be thinking, well, as well as the security requirement here, I would be thinking, well, that pretty much fits into business premium really quite well. Yes, the business standard and business basic, well, they do have some functional and fundamental security mechanisms built in, but you don't get the full Office suite with that, and a few other things. Business premium is kind of, I think, if someone came to me with that sort of a brief, that would be where I'd nudge them in. So it then says, well, you need to determine the best plan for your business. So I then thought, right, okay, well, if I give it some context and give it a bit more an explanation of what I want, then maybe that'll yield some better results. So as my consultant, I want you to consider the facts and make a recommendation. We have 50 users. The users are already used to using Microsoft Office Suite, so they should have desktop versions of these applications. We need to ensure we have good security features enabled, such as MFA, email security, and endpoint protection. Considering the above, which license do we need? So with that added context, again, as a consultant, I'm thinking straight, like, it's business premium. It's absolutely business premium. There might be a couple of cases where you want one of the enterprise licenses, maybe E5, if there were some more niche requirements that you started picking at, but it's business premium. That is the answer in this. So based on your requirements, I recommend business premium. So ChatGPT has got that absolutely spot on. And I'm pretty happy with that. So what I then decided to do next was to be a little bit mean and throw a little bit of a curveball. And I wanted to see here what ChatGPT would do if I put my accountancy hat on, or my CFO hat on, and said, well, business standard's cheaper. Would business standard not suit our needs better? And it was interesting, because the first thing it then did was apology. It was give an apology, and then say that business standard would actually be okay. I don't think that's necessarily right. I mean, yeah. If we look further down the prompt, it also then says, especially if you have or plan to have third-party security solutions. And I've not mentioned anything about any third-party security solutions. It's I've said that Microsoft needs to be doing this, and that needs to be our platform. So it does, to be fair, it does caveat it. If you're comfortable with the standard security features provided by business standard, then it may be a more cost-effective option. But for me, I know as a consultant that that is not the right answer. And if someone challenged me with that, I would be saying to them, look, no, you're not going to get away with business standard. You need business premium, because it's going to give you that level of protection that you're just not going to have otherwise. So go a little bit further down and say that, I then said, we don't have any third-party security products. We need to make sure we're secure. I've reminded it again as my consultant. And this is a big thing. I think if you keep on reiterating, like, as my consultant, you're consulting, you need to tell me what to do. You need to give me the best recommendations. It's almost like the more I iterate on that and focus on that, the more ChatGPT makes recommendations rather than gives me instructions. And that's all about feeding as much context as possible. It then goes back to saying that if you don't have any third party security products in place to ensure your organization's security, then I recommend business premium. And that's right. That's the right answer. So I'm pretty impressed with that. But at the same time, it got the answer right the first time, but I didn't like that it just flopped when I challenged it the first time with, well, let's look at a cheaper option. So that's somewhere where maybe you need to be aware that, again, if you're using this for stuff that you don't know so much about, it could maybe lead you down a bit of a rabbit hole that you don't want to go down. So after we do the licenses and pick a plan, the next step in the chain was to configure domains. So I said to ChatGPT, as my consultant, can you tell me more about setting up the domain in M365 whilst conforming to best practice? Is there anything we should be aware of? And that's a question that I get quite a lot when I'm consulting and talking to customers. They often say, well, what are the gotchas? What are the pitfalls? What do I need to think about? How do I do this? But how do I do it well rather than just give me some steps and an instruction from docs.microsoft.com? So it's saying here, purchase a domain if you don't already own it, add the domain into M365, click setup, click add domain, blah, 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 update your DNS record. And this is again where we differ ever so slightly. It's saying that you need to configure SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. Now, again, if you already have SPF, DKIM, and DMARC and you need to do a domain migration, if you go and edit those records ahead of time, SPF's okay, DKIM and DMARC you're already going to have set up, and until you migrate, you may not want to actually start editing or changing those records. So again, it's got things right, but they're not necessarily all in the right order. If I took this as a verbatim plan, I'm not going to have the best of experiences. It'll probably work and be okay. And if you added the new DKIM records or the C names for the DKIM for M365 and didn't delete the old ones, then you're going to be okay. But if you're approaching this from a position of I'm not really sure what I'm doing, you could get yourself into a little bit of hot water because you might think, well, I've added these new records. Do I need the old ones now? I'll just delete those, and that's going to break stuff. So I actually followed the steps that ChatGPT did. So one of its recommendations was to go onto Google Domains. So I went to Google Domains and I purchased a lovely new domain, mattonmicrosoft.com. So I thought we might just check and make sure that we got the steps right. Now, in the interest of time and making sure that we didn't run over massively whilst waiting for things, I actually did add the TXT record that we need to validate this domain ahead of time. So if we go to the domain, I think it's DNS. Yes, there we go. So you can see I've added a TXT record where I've partly added the domain in M365. But so ChatGPT was saying we needed to go into the M365 admin center and we had to go to domains and then add a domain. Pretty sure that was, yeah, set up all domains, add domain, enter the domain name. Cool. We can see that I've already done that bit. So we've got an incomplete setup here. So let's just check and do a little cross check. So add a domain, update the DNS. M365 will provide you with a list of DNS records that need to be added. Well, yeah, it asked me for a TXT record, which we can see that I've added. The SPF, CNAME, T, and SRV, they come a little bit later on. So after that, it kind of actually thinking about it here, enter your custom domain name. It's not really necessarily telling you what you need to do, but to be fair, Microsoft do a pretty good job, and this is all wizard driven, so I wouldn't necessarily expect ChatGPT to do that. So let's just quickly verify that domain. And then we want to add our own DNS records. And this is where ChatGPT was saying that you would get given all of the values. So I would say, I'm not going to do this now whilst we're all on the call because we've only got a few minutes left, but I would say that was pretty accurate and pretty good. Once we've done the domains, as our consultant, what is the next steps that we should take? So it still goes back to, I thought I'd just reiterate this just to see if, with all the additional context and all the additional work we've done, whether or not it would give a better answer. But unsurprisingly, it's kind of gone back to the next steps: create a user account, assign the licenses, set up email, configure Teams. And okay, so I then thought, let's try and prompt it a little bit better. So I said, would we not be better off and more secure configuring the tenant, specifically email and Teams first, then adding the users? And again, this goes back to that original call out that I made in the first prompt, that we have to be secure and we can't be susceptible to attack. And ChatGPT then says, yeah, okay, you're correct that certain settings before adding the users can enhance security and streamline the onboarding process. But that has to come from a position of knowledge rather than a position of, I'm not really sure what I'm doing, but I think I can do this. Let's just see if ChatGPT can guide me along the way. So again, it's saying about setting up email, configuring the domain. And I'm not particularly happy with this answer either. Migrating existing email data, I would be wanting to set up the anti-phishing policies, the safe links policies, safe attachment policies, making sure that the anti-spam was configured as per my requirements. I'd also want to be setting up all of the Teams policies. In fact, actually, to be fair, it does say about the Teams policies here, and then the implementation of security features. Again, another thing that's worth mentioning is ATP, Advanced Threat Protection. That was what Microsoft now calls Defender, and that's what the product was called a few years ago, but it has since moved to Defender. So if you try to Google, how do I set up ATP, you're going to find a little bit of outdated information. If you ask ChatGPT about how to set up ATP, you're going to find it tries to take you through the old Security and Compliance Center, which has now been split out into the Microsoft Security Center and the Compliance Center, because it's all moved over to Defender and Purview now. So again, I guess that's not ChatGPT's fault. It's just trained on data that's old, and when it gets a bit more mature and we trust it working with live data, then maybe that will get a little bit better. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Not entirely sure what to make of that. After that, I asked it to summarize the setup and configuration in an email. We need to ensure that we use all the best features in our license package that you recommended, Microsoft Business Premium, and leverage all the protection possible. And again, it says about migrating the email data first. The whole point of making sure that you're secure is ensuring that you've put all the security policies in place first. So where it says enable advanced threat protection, that should be point number one, like 100%. There's no doubt about it. Implementing SPF DKIM and DMARC, that should be higher up the list as well. Setting up DLP, if that's important, that should be higher up the list as well, to be honest. It's quite a lot of legwork, but it should be higher. Spam and malware filters, that should be up the top of the list. Multi-factor authentication, that should be straight out of the box. So we've got 2 minutes left to go, and I'm conscious that I don't want to overrun for people. What I'm just going to kind of say what I think and kind of give an overview. Overall, approaching this from a position of knowledge and one where I understand what's being recommended and why, I think it's a good tool to use for professionals to remind themselves of the steps that they need to take, because something like building out an M365 tenant is a big job. And every now and again, we need prompts. We need someone to bounce ideas off of. And especially for me, working as a freelancer, I don't have a big team of people that I can go and ask questions to. I do have connections and contacts, but sometimes it's handy just to have a little memory jog or someone there to remind me of a couple of steps that I might have forgotten. So from that point of view, I think it's really, really handy. For someone who doesn't know anything or has very low knowledge of M365, I don't think this is a particularly great tool for setting up a tenant. I think I've exposed a lot of points where I've asked reasonably contextual, good questions with a decent amount of information, and I'm still not getting the answers I want. Now, it might be my fault. I've only been using ChatGPT for a couple of weeks, much like everybody else. But I have used it a reasonable amount. I'm sure you can see here on the left hand side, I've got a number of chats of various different topics. Um, yeah, I'm just not 100% sure that it's what I would use in a consultative fashion. And if someone didn't have any knowledge of what they were doing, I'd say it could be a little bit dangerous almost to just follow it verbatim, because you're not going to get that experience that someone's been through, and you're not going to you can't convey all of the context of your requirement through to ChatGPT.